Hello, and welcome to the Banff at Altitude podcast, celebrating 50 years of adventure storytelling from the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival. Since its beginning in 1976, the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival has been a gathering place in celebration of all things mountain culture. The yearly festival, hosted at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, fosters an appreciation of the world's mountain places by creating opportunities for people to share and find inspiration in mountain experiences, ideas, and visions. Over the years, we've spoken to hundreds of incredible adventurers who share their spectacular and moving stories. My name is Joanna Croston, and I'm going to be digging through our festival archives to revive some of our favorite presentations from the past to get you stoked for what's to come in 2025, our 50th anniversary. And well, hopefully you'll be stoked for life in general. In continuing with this tradition of sharing stories and connections, we hope this podcast will inspire you to explore, preserve, and enjoy the great outdoors. Beth Rodden is one of the best female rock climbers of our time and a globally recognized ambassador for the outdoor community. She has achieved a number of notable free climbs on El Capitan and has also established the most difficult first ascent of a crack climb ever done by a woman. She has been climbing for 30 years and hopes to be climbing for 30 more. In 2024, Rodden's memoir, A Light Through the Cracks, was published. It's an inspiring book about overcoming devastating trauma, refusing to be held hostage by fear, and taking a leap toward healing. From the 2024 festival, here is Beth Rodden on our main stage in conversation with journalist and author Eva Holland.
Hello.
Hello.
I guess we'll just jump right into things. Probably a lot of you here already know at least parts of Beth's story and some of the stuff that she wrote about in the book. But just a quick recap so everyone's with us. 24 years ago, Beth and her then boyfriend, Tommy Caldwell, were kidnapped on a climbing expedition in Kyrgyzstan, and with two other climbers had just a really horrifying 6-day experience that ended with a pretty dramatic escape. And that's the really, really short version of a really long story. I want to start with Kyrgyzstan because that's where the book starts. Beth, this story's been told, in films, in books, in articles. You've told the story many times yourself, but for many years you had a certain way of telling it, and then with the book you've decided to kind of take things a little deeper. What prompted you to start telling a fuller version of the story?
Back when this happened in 2000, the climbing community was a lot different. It's still, I feel like, pretty male-dominated, but back then, showing any fear or anything vulnerable was really seen as a weakness. And so when we came home, we were kind of in this community that celebrated this event instead of, kind of asking us how we were doing, how they could help. It was kind of like, wow, you had such a great epic, you guys are heroes, all this sort of thing. And so I think for me, I thought that I needed to kind of just jump on that bandwagon, and I saw Tommy doing that, and he seemed to be totally fine. And I just got on this way of being able to tell like a 3-minute, very surface level version of the story, and kind of had this made us stronger. Bad things just lead to growth and strength. But as life went on, I realized that this was affecting me in ways that I didn't want to admit, and I didn't think it should be affecting me like trauma would, because of how the climbing community is. It's just, there's so much death and trauma in it, and it's, at least back then, was treated as just kind of like part of it, or maybe even better than reaching a summit was, tragedy to that summit. And so for me, realizing that maybe this isn't something that I should cover up, maybe it's something that I should figure out how it's actually impacting me, how it's affecting my life, my relationships. Was it something that I think would have been a gift to me back in 2000, had other people been talking about it in that way. And so I thought that not only do I need to do this for me, but for, anybody else that is also struggling with the trauma and not feeling like they can actually open up and go deep into it and really figure out the ways that it's affecting their lives.
I know that hasn't always been easy, but it's been probably really important for you and for lots of readers and listeners as you've been talking about it. You worked on this manuscript for several years before you brought me in to help you with it.
Yeah.
And I think of one thing that happened when we were working on it together. I had sent you some notes on the Kyrgyzstan chapters, and I was like, get back to me with what you think about these edits. And you were like, hey, my husband's away right now. Can we do this when he's back? Because I don't like to go deep into my Kyrgyzstan memories when I'm home alone with my kid. And I just think that's the type of thing that kindness to yourself that you weren't able to give yourself for so many years. Younger Beth would never have been like, hey, maybe I should take care of myself instead of shoving this down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like for me, therapy was such a mind, blowing, opening thing. And that not only was I completely skeptical that it would work, because I was like, I survived 15 plus years, and now you're wanting me to, unbox this thing that I've strategically sealed away, and you want me to talk about it all the time. And that just seemed really reckless and silly. But it just showed me all these different ways of thinking about things and approaching things, whereas I was really just on this one path, for so long. And I was like, oh, wait. It's equally as valid to take care of yourself and be kind to yourself as it is to suck it up and suffer for a summit or whatnot. But one is way more celebrated than the other. And so that's when I kind of was like, oh, wait, no, both are valid, both are equal. There's many ways to kind of tread that path.
After the kidnapping, you and Tommy continued to climb together, and you had a huge number of achievements. Is it fair to say that you're more interested in talking about the emotional work that you've done than you are in talking about your old climbs?
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like when I started working with you, you're like, this is really a great book, however, there's zero climbing in it. And you're like, I think we're going to need to add some. I was like, oh, okay.
She's like, do we have to put Meltdown in? I was like, we do. Yeah.
It was very reluctantly.
Yeah. But how was that process like to spend time thinking about, freeing El Cap or working on Meltdown and trying to explain your process on those climbs? Because I found that stuff fascinating, and I know that you didn't love having to put it in, but was it interesting to sort of look at your own process that way?
Yeah, I feel like that was one of the most interesting things to me in the book, actually, was I'd never thought about how I climbed before, which seems really weird for a professional athlete. I thought a lot about the actual climb and the actual problem solving, but I never thought about how I actually did it. I know a lot of people go to sports psychologists and figure out how to get into flow state or whatnot. But for me, that was never something I had to work on. It was something that I could do. And so then to figure out how to write about that, I feel like that was one of the most interesting things to work on, because I'd never opened up that sausage. I was always like, the sausage is good. I don't need to figure out how I do it. Don't mess with it. But I feel like that was a really interesting thing. I was like, oh, I actually have a process. I actually have techniques that I do, but I just never actually labeled them. I never understood what I did. It just kind of really came totally natural to me. So that was really fun after you were like, no, you actually should write about climbing in your climbing memoir.
Yeah. We got to put El Cap in.
Yeah.
It's the law. I remember reading some of the analogies you came up with and being sort of fascinated by them. The one that haunts my dreams a little bit is when you were working on Meltdown, which was a crack climb. I'm not really a climber. And you talked about the rock being if you broke the neck of a bottle and then it was in the ocean for a while, so it wasn't as sharp as a freshly broken bottle, but it was still the edge of a broken bottle, and then sticking your finger into the bottle and turning and hanging your weight on it. And I don't like to think about it. But was it difficult to explain stuff like that I went to see Meltdown when I came to visit you, and I didn't see any holds. But
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because I think you or Mark said to me, Mark was the other amazing person that helped with this manuscript. Eva and Mark were just like my shining lights. But one of you said, describe it to me like I'm in kindergarten or something. And I was like, well, how would I describe this to like a little kid that isn't doing it? And so I tried to come up with all these analogies. But you're right. I mean, it's not a very bright thing to like stick your finger in a bottle. And I mean, crack climbing just isn't very bright in general. So when you think about what you're doing to your body and your joints. But I figured we need to figure out a way to describe this to people who aren't on the climb or who haven't experienced similar climbs or anything like that. So
I think one of the hard things to express too is like, you loved climbing still. It was this huge part of your life. It continues to be in a different way now, which is more or less the point of the book. But it was also this kind of like, became increasingly kind of a toxic force in your life through these years when you were having these really notable accomplishments. Do you think that was something that changed as you aged, or was it always toxic and you began to kind of recognize it more?
I got into climbing in the mid-90s in a gym, and I feel like that's how most kids get into it now. But back then, that was really rare, right? We were like the first generation of kid climbers. And so when I got into it, it was pure bliss and joy, right? It wasn't like toxic in any way. Yeah, I was a competitive kid, so I competed, but I didn't feel like that part of it was tainted at all. I really loved climbing for many different reasons, like the communal aspect, the physical aspect. It was just fun for me. But then I feel like slowly with unhealthy things in the sport, like with eating issues and body image, those trickle in, kids are like sponges, and so I absorbed a lot of that. But still probably had, kind of a healthy relationship with climbing. And then after Kyrgyzstan, I actually didn't climb for a year because I just associated climbing with almost dying, seeing people die, just associated most of what I loved about climbing with really horrific memories. And when I started climbing again, it wasn't because I found the joy again. It was more like, oh, Tommy is thriving right now. Maybe I just need to just shove this down and get back on that horse, because clearly what I'm doing is I'm just floundering here and I don't know how to get back. And so I kind of just shoved everything down and got back on the bandwagon. And it kind of worked, right? Because you do an accomplishment and people tell you how great you are and you're like, oh, I feel pretty good about myself, for like a kind of a short while. And then somebody else does something and so you're forgotten. So it's like kind of this like cycle. It's like you do something, you feel good about yourself, people tell you you should feel good about yourself, you get a raise in a movie and things like that, and it's kind of like this addictive thing. And so I think during that time, I was only doing it for that outcome, of having other people tell me how great I was. Not that I didn't like doing these accomplishments, because I do like goal setting, but I feel like there was so much other stuff going on underneath that it was really hard to appreciate climbing for climbing instead of being like this crutch that I was using to get through each day, month, year, whatnot. And then, after a while, that changes, in life. And I think now I truly do love climbing. It's joyful to me, to go out.
I'm glad. You were 20 and just turned 20, and Tommy was 22 when you were in Kyrgyzstan. He turned 22 in Kyrgyzstan. So
yeah,
you were tiny babies trying to cope with this stuff.
Totally. And John Dickey was the oldest member of the group. I think he was 24 or 5 at the time. But when you're 19, 20, you're like, I have got this figured out. I am fully an adult. I know what I'm doing, Mom. And now you're like, oh, wait, no, my brain isn't even fully formed then. So
you weren't even old enough to drink.
No.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
So climbing is this crutch, but it's also making you and Tommy into a global brand within the slightly niche climbing industry. And you have these things going on under the surface that you're not really acknowledging. This goes on for 8-9 years. And then your marriage ended. And a lot of things changed for you in terms of your relationship with the industry at that point too. Like really you walked away from a marriage, but also like a business partnership and a brand. And that was huge. You didn't come and do stuff like this for quite a while afterwards.
Mm-hmm. It was really hard to step out, when it's like you're so attached to someone and something and you're like known as Beth and Tommy. You're not known as Beth and Tommy, you're like known as Beth and Tommy. It was really hard to go out and into the industry, especially because it's it's a pretty male-dominated place, and I feel like, a lot of people don't want to hear the whole human story around everything. They just want to hear the high-level surface thing and go from there. So I think it was hard for me to do, It's like I'm a hermit if I can be, which seems weird to sit up here, but it was hard to do that thing for a while.
Just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this morning. Alex Honnold shared a podcast episode you did about his book, and top comment on Instagram is some complete rando who's like, I can't listen to this. I can't forgive her for what she did to my boy Tommy. I hope Tommy sees this, buddy.
Yeah, it's really interesting living like a somewhat public life. I can't even imagine like actual celebrities, but I do it too. When I was like in my 20s and a celebrity couple would break up, I would be so sad. When Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston, I was like, why? I was like, they were perfect. So I get it, right? It like triggers people, and it's like something that triggers in their life. Yeah, it's a bummer to read it sometimes, but then you also kind of just have to be like, sorry, move on, We've all moved on. It's all good.
Yeah. Which brings me to something that you've been really outspoken about in more recent years, which is, some of the sexist experiences you've had in the industry. And in the book, you talk about pay disparity, maybe one film featuring female athletes at a festival. And it's nice to see a lot of that has changed. And I think you've helped drive that conversation. Do you think things are like really getting better on that front?
I feel like things are definitely changing. Like in the mid to late 90s when I was first getting sponsored, there was like the token female on an athlete team. It was, like the company could be like, check, have our diversity. And I think honestly that sowed a lot of competition between the women, right? Because if you didn't kind of keep your seat at the table, someone would quickly fill that seat. And so I think it created this pretty unhealthy dynamic between peers. But I think things are definitely moving forward. Like now you look at athlete teams, now you look at film festivals, and there aren't really, sadly, no magazines anymore, but like advertisements and things like that, and it's pretty equal, if not sometimes weighted more towards female. When I was married to Tommy, obviously like we're husband and wife, so we know each other's contracts, I was like consistently paid, a lot of times from the same sponsor, a third less. And we had equal amount of covers on climbing magazines and feature articles and things like that. I just thought that's how it worked, and I was grateful for what I got. So I don't know specifically if pay has come up, because obviously, like, I'm not married to another professional climber, but I do think that we're moving in the right direction. I don't think it's like a finish line that we've crossed, but I do think it's drastically better than it was, 20, 25 years ago.
On the note of competition between the handful of female pro climbers back then, I think one of the most beautiful things in the book for me is watching fierce young Beth, who just starts out sort of seeing the other girls as competition, learn like the absolute joy of female friendship instead of always being the lone, girl with all the guys. And I think that was a really important part of the book for you to include and to show people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like during my divorce, the first person I called was my dad, which is great because it shows like how close I am with my dad. But it's because I literally had no girlfriends. Tommy and I had friends together, but no individual friends. And so to have this evolution now, where like I have this group of girlfriends that I find very near and dear to my heart, it just seemed like such a foreign concept in my 20s. I was like, wait, you're honest with each other and you like tell each other all the things and your feelings? And I'm like, wow, this is lovely. Who needs a husband,
There were some things about your life that I found relatable, but that piece of your experience was so foreign to me because I feel like I've just had that since I was a little kid, and that was what was reliable way more than boys.
Right.
So it was really cool to watch you grow into that. And
yeah, no, it's been just a treat, honestly, in my life.
Shout out to best friends.
Yay.
Other stuff you've made progress on. I feel like the theme of the book is figuring a lot of different pieces of your life out at different times, but I want to talk about food a bit.
Yeah.
You had a mentor when you were a teenage competition climber who lost 5 pounds before every comp, and so you were like, well, I'm going to lose 10. Mm-hmm. And you were like 85 pounds. Mm-hmm. Like you didn't have a pound to lose, So I know that was actually something that you've worked on even more recently, like than starting work on the book. When you started work on the book, you even hadn't figured some of those pieces out yet, right?
Yeah, no, totally. This book was a very long process. Like, I think I was 5 years overdue. But I'm kind of actually grateful for that now because you're right. Like, I hadn't started working through eating issues, or I'd done some therapy. But yeah, I mean, in the late 90s and early 2000s, I feel like the sport, I'm not a mountaineer or have anything to do with snow, but at least on like the dry rock front, it was all about like being light, not being strong. You know, the top climbers are talking about how they eat lettuce for 3 days before they go try and send their project, because then that will make them lighter. And, you know, as a kid, again, like I said that before, you're just a sponge and you're like, well, this is what they do and they're at the top, so I guess this is what I'll do and maybe I'll get to the top too. You know, the feedback was like sadly very rewarding in that if you did get lighter in the short term, it worked. I don't think it has very much longevity for people in the sport. I feel like your body eventually will start to break down and that type of thing. But I feel like that's something that when I was growing up in the sport, and until recently, I would say in the past 5-8 years, has been kind of like the shadow in the closet, right? That people don't want to talk about. And then gradually, as more and more people are talking about it, it's becoming less in the shadow, because I feel like the more you talk about it, the less people, you know, are doing it or are ashamed of it and feel less alone with it. And so I think that's something we're making progress with. Like the IFSC, the governing body for the World Cup competitions, you know, is starting to try and have athlete resources around it and have clinics for athletes around it. And I feel like that's just something that would have never happened before, right? It was always, you never talked about it, but everyone was doing it. And I feel like that shift has been huge in the sport, to have kids and young people understand that you can be strong and you don't have to be super rail thin. So I feel like it's something that is getting better. Again, I don't think we've crossed a finish line, but I think it's wonderful how people are shedding more and more light on it.
And that's something that can affect everyone, right? Not just female climbers. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel like I started writing about it on social media maybe a handful of years ago, and I was blown away at the amount of male messages that I got. Like, oh, yeah, like I struggle with body image too. And I was like, oh, I thought this was just, you know, our issue, but it's like it's so prevalent across the board.
And you did have years of injuries kind of after some of your most famous climbs. There's a lot, I don't know if I should have asked if we're allowed to swear up here. There's a line we had to fight to keep in the book. I had fucked with my body for so long, and now my body was fucking with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a book called The Body Keeps Score, and I think it also talked about like trauma and things like that, but I feel like you can't just abuse your body for that long and starve it and overtrain for, you know, years and years and years without something happening. And so, you know, I definitely experienced that.
The training sequences you describe in the book when you and Tommy were young and making things up as you went along are horrifying.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I don't know if anybody else, but I'm sure there's plenty of people. It's kind of like weirdly addicting to go out and just obliterate yourself. And then I kind of liked it. I still would like... I mean, zero science behind it, right? Like now I know there's like, you hang on the board for this many seconds and then you rest for this many seconds. And we were just like, we should train until our arms fall off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you would hang on until you couldn't close your hands anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You have been speaking out about this stuff, and that's been kind of a turn in your career. When you brought me on to help with the book, you said, I want to write the book that like younger me would have needed to read. Is that kind of what has been driving you to speak out, like on Instagram and in your talks and stuff too, about all these issues?
Yeah, in that in my 20s, my profession was professional climbing, my marriage was professional climbing, all of my friendships were professional climbing. And once I kind of like stepped outside of that, I started to just like question the narratives and like the dialogues that we all, at least I subscribed to for so long, and that like, I feel like it's equally as valid and equally as rewarding to do X, Y, and Z, you know, like be a mom or go climbing with your girlfriends or something. But like over here, the only thing that's celebrated and, you know, has any notoriety is these like suffer fests and like abusing your body and sucking it up. And so once I started to be like, wait, but this is Like, I don't know why we're rewarding one or the other. Then I feel like I started to question the other dialogues, like eating, like why don't we talk about fear and trauma in such a community that has so much, right? Why don't we talk about pregnancy and, life as a mother, athlete, just all these things that were just not accepted for so long. And I also think probably I started to do that because I did have like a more stable and fulfilling relationship that I was like, well, if I blow something up over here, that's all right, I still got this, Whereas before I'm like, man, if I blow this up, that's like everything, like I lose my profession and everything. And so I was really scared to do it when I subscribed to those beliefs so religiously, and when those were like my entire life and world. But once you start to have more variety and diversity and interests and loves, you're kind of like, wait, but this is really cool, and maybe we should all start talking about it and acknowledging it.
I love the way you described civilians, for lack of a better word, like the climbers that you started hanging out with who would come up to Yosemite on the weekends, and you were like, they had jobs, and they went to restaurants, and they ate vegetables.
Yeah. I called them my normal friends. I was like, oh, these are like normal people. And I just feel like they had so much more breadth to their life, whereas I was like, I've got climbing. And if I had a dinner party, it's like we'd talk about beta and weather conditions. I was like, this is so boring. And so I'm like, it'd be cooler to talk about other stuff, Yeah. So it was like eye-opening for me.
And you are a mom. When I, with only a little bias, recommend the book to people, I recommend it to a lot of women who have experienced huge changes to their bodies during and after childbirth and while raising kids. And I think that that's like something the stuff that you've said about that publicly, I think is something people are really, really hungry for. And in the time since you started speaking out more, like it's a larger conversation. It's not just like you alone in the wilderness, but I really think there's so much hunger for what you have to say about this stuff, and just being open about like postpartum complications and like.
Yeah, I feel like I had such a hard physical postpartum, and I knew no one, or I heard of no one that had such a hard physical postpartum, from breastfeeding and like couldn't stand up from a prolapse. And I was like, I am just this terrible anomaly that can't handle this. But then again, once I started talking about it publicly, all these other women came in and were like, oh, me too, and this and that. And I was like, oh, wait, why don't we talk about this, right? Like, this is such a source of strength for me right now, and then a source of strength for those other women. I'm just like, because we can't talk about it. And it didn't make sense to me. And even now, like going through perimenopause and having my prolapse come back because your pelvic floor can thin and your estrogen tanks. And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. And I was like so public about my pelvic floor injury before. And I'm like, here we are again, like history repeating itself. Let's like talk about this so we can learn and, not feel so alone in this stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know why we don't talk about it, because we should.
We're both of a certain age, and I think about a year ago we had a call where I was like, nobody warned me, and you're like, I know.
I know. It's just not talked about. I'm just like, at least in the States, like menopause wasn't taught to doctors, right? Because it's like, oh, well, you're past child rearing age, then we don't need you anymore, and you're just like, wait, but there's like, we're not even halfway through. Let's keep going, people.
I heard something on a podcast, because I listen to menopause podcasts now.
As we all should.
Maybe things are a bit different here, but I heard that in the US, many insurance plans will cover one menopause visit per woman, one doctor's visit. Perimenopause can last 2 to 10 years.
Yeah, I know. It's like, it's mind-boggling. We just need to start talking about it more, because then people aren't like, I'm the only one, and you feel so alone and weird and odd, and you're like, oh no, this is like everyone. We should talk about this.
I mean, it affects everyone, but especially for athletes, it really shakes your identity to have your muscles shrinking away. You just like can't do what you used to do, and it's so hard to get it back and so hard to recover. And
yeah. I'm like a big American football fan, which might seem weird, but I'm just like a sports fanatic. And so we watch football games on Sunday, and there are so many erectile dysfunction ads on those things. And yet then when I talk about like my pessary for my prolapse, like everybody's like, what is that? And I'm like, we should have pessary ads at the Super Bowl or something, because I'm like, there's like clearly lopsided here, you know? A pessary is something to help your pelvic floor, if nobody knows. I feel like we've gotten wildly off topic. Yes. Can we talk about menopause at Banff?
I feel confident there are people out there who are happy to hear about it. So how has it been having the book out in the world? It's been, what, 6 months now? 5-6 months?
Yeah, I feel like that's about right. We turned in the final manuscript in like August of last year. And so then I was like weirdly detached, you know, because like life goes on. It's like I got to pack lunch every day for my kid and take him to school. And it's just like you kind of get into life. And then when it came out, I was like, oh, right. You know, and people were like, when you wrote about this, and I was like, did I write about that? I was like, on page 264, I was like, oh, go us, you know? So then it was kind of like a whirlwind, but yeah, like I'm really happy I did it. It's like opened up these conversations. I've heard from so many people saying, you know, how they related to like the trauma part or the motherhood part or the divorce, all these things that maybe seemed a little raw to write about. I feel like that's the pieces that people have talked about. Not that I feel like we have very much like macho look at me parts, but it's never that part that somebody talked about. So that's been really nice, and to go around and meet people, and yeah.
It can be so awkward to feel like you're, like you said, talking about yourself, which is not your favorite thing to do, unfortunately for your career choice at the moment, but it can feel so like weird to put yourself in the center of things, and then you realize that actually sharing your personal story can be so meaningful to other people. And you're not just sitting and talking about yourself in like a self-centered way. It's actually, if you do it right, it's the most powerful way to relate to other people, I think.
Yeah, I feel like for me, my favorite books are the memoirs, and they can be something that I have zero understanding about or whatnot. But it's, again, if they do it right, you can just totally feel yourself in their shoes, and it's those shared stories and circumstances that really connect. So on that front, it's, I'm really glad that I did it.
Good. I'm glad. The Agassi book was one of your inspirations. Andre Agassi's memoir, which if you haven't read it is fantastic.
It's super top notch. On a page, I learned that he was really sad that he was going bald and he was wearing implants, that he hated Michael Chang, and then all this like crazy training stuff. And I was like, it's just so complex, his brain. And I was like, that's what I feel like I really relate to, not just the highlight reel of I did this, I came, I saw, I conquered, and go me, type of thing. There's a lot of books out there like that, and that's great. But those aren't the ones that I relate to, and I feel like that's what I wanted to do.
Have you had any surprises from putting the book out into the world? Anything that's surprised you about the response, or hearing from people from your past, or I don't know?
That's a good question. Oh, my third grade teacher reached out to me, which, yeah. It's a little weird to think about your third grade teacher reading your book, but I don't know. It's also kind of cool, right? It's like these people from the past that I obviously don't forget about, but kind of like, well, it was a different me and a different time, and wouldn't expect them to pick up a book from, one of their hundreds and hundreds of students. So that was really sweet. And my granny read it, which I thought was really sweet too. Granny just turned 100, and she's in the book a lot. So, but yeah, again, I think for me, it was like this really big project, and I'm really happy I did it. But I really find so much joy in like day-to-day life right now, and life goes on, and I'm actually kind of glad about that. It's not something that has totally derailed my life and made it wildly and vastly different than what it was. It's now I just have like a little bit more brain capacity, although you'd never know it, and a little bit more time.
And your husband still hasn't read it?
Yeah, Randy has still not read it, to my knowledge. I don't know if he ever will, actually, which is fine. He's very present in the life, so I'm like, he knows all the stuff.
And he's a pretty private guy, so.
He's a pretty private guy, which maybe it's good that he doesn't read it then.
He was like, I'm not in it very much, right? And we're like,
not at all, yeah. Not at all.
It's totally fine.
Yeah. I think he's one of those people that's like, I can't hear you, and so it's like if he doesn't read it, then he's just fine.
Do you think your son will ever read it?
I don't know, that's a good question. Maybe parts of, I don't know. Would you read your mom or dad's memoir? Yeah, I probably would, actually. So maybe he will.
What was the hardest part about working on the book for you?
I think the easy thing would be to say Kyrgyzstan, but I think because I had done so much therapy, that wasn't the hardest. I think the whole section around the divorce was the hardest, because I feel like there's still like guilt or shame or, all the hard feelings around that, about failing, about all that sort of thing, that even now I feel like our families are really friends, like our kids trick-or-treated last night together and things like that. But, I think there's always a part of me that wished it would have ended differently, or wished there wasn't some shame and guilt around it. And so I think that was probably a hard thing to write about.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I know one thing that was really important to you was not to have kind of a neat and tidy conclusion to the book, and then she bagged another summit and everything was great, because it's all still a work in progress for you. It's not like you've just figured out your trauma permanently. That was a hard thing for us to express sometimes to the editors. We don't want it to just wrap up with a bow. How does that feel to you, the way we left things at the end of the book?
I mean, I think we tried to walk that line pretty well. Obviously, it would have been great if I did another 514 and I could be and now I'm great and back, and here I am, hear me roar. But it never happened. And I feel like that's probably a bigger lesson for me, to realize that it can't all just be concluded with a climb and that solves everything, that a lot of times life is much more meandering and gray. And yeah, for me, there's no boxes to check with therapy or body image or any of the more complicated stuff that I feel like we tried to talk about in the book. And I think that has probably been one of the biggest lessons, is it's okay if it's something that is with you for longer and you have to revisit occasionally. I think that our community and just, society in general always wants the quick fix, well, here's how you feel great and here's how you are happy. And I'm well, maybe it's way more nuanced than that, Maybe there's good days and bad days, and that's part of being a human, and that's what we all signed up for.
I think that's probably a pretty good place to leave it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Be sure to pick up a copy of A Light Through the Cracks at your local bookstore. We look forward to you joining us for the next episode of Banff at Altitude. Join the festivities and help us celebrate 50 years of adventure stories at the heart of the festival here in Banff. Check out our website at banffmountainfestival.ca. This episode was produced by Anique C. and is a production of Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. The theme music was composed by Jacques Blackstone. A special thanks to our audio engineer Ben Ewing and the production team at Banff Centre, as well as the folks from the Paul D. Fleck Library.